Today, we have a fascinating discussion planned for you today. It's one by Dr. John C. Hagan III, and he is the author of a recent book. It was published in 2017 called The Science of Near-Death Experiences. Dr. Hagan is a medical doctor, and he wanted to take a scientific, data-driven analysis of what many people have reported for all of recorded history. But in recent times, because of our more scientific emphasis in our culture, folks and technology advancements, folks have been able to more carefully monitor and measure some of the experiences that people report when they have what is believed to be a clinical state of death or something close to it. And in the course of this discussion, we'll use some distinctions. There's been a recent paper that has proposed a different term to more precisely delineate between individuals who maybe they had a brush with death, or they fainted or something, and they recall something vivid or something different beyond their comprehension, versus folks who've actually been, to the best of our scientific knowledge, clinically dead and experience a recollection of an experience outside of our common consideration about what happens when one is dead clinically. So, Dr. Hagan, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, David, for inviting me. Look forward to our discussion.
Yeah. Now, typically, my program, Things Hidden, the podcast, we typically get into anthropology. We get into studying mythology. We study ancient history. We connect it to current events. So more broader societal issues. And of course, this has a lot to do with this topic. But I was impressed when I listened to your book on audio, just how meticulous you were in kind of capturing all the different data and going bit by bit into kind of, as carefully as you could, a scientific analysis of people's experiences at a near-death level. So I really enjoy it, and I recommend people check it out, The Science of Near-Death Experiences. Right off the bat, it's not something you're doing. You told me it's not a monetary incentive for you to promote that book, but it's something that I enjoyed in its kind of careful consideration of all the facts and different arguments that people have made thus far in this topic.
Yes, well, again, I got into near-death experiences by being at a party, and a friend of mine, we both like to read, and he said he was reading a book about near-death experiences, and as a doctor, I certainly knew about that and what I think about them, and I'd never heard of them before. So he loaned me the book, and I read it. The book was Dr. Moody's first book about near-death experiences. And I said, wow, why didn't I know this? So I read more and more and more, and I was impressed by a number of things. One is that if someone almost dies and they're resuscitated or they come back to life, and you ask them if they had anything unusual happen while they were almost dead or dead, would they like to talk about it? And if you do that, 1 out of 5 people has what we now call near-death experience. On the other hand, if you don't systematically ask about the near-death experience, only 2% of people will self-report. And as a physician, I am very much involved in medical education. I teach and lecture at 3 medical schools here in Kansas City. And I became aware that if a physician has a patient that has a near-death experience and they tell their doctor or their nurses about it, what they're told is that didn't really happen. It was your brain on low oxygen. Don't tell anybody. People will think you're crazy. Then you're really doing a disservice to your patient. So I feel that it's extremely important for physicians, nurses, everybody in the healthcare field to know about near-death experiences, and if a patient reports one, to be sympathetic and empathetic. When I give my lectures, basically what I say is that in a healthcare venue, the physician should inquire, while you were asleep, did anything, or while you almost died, was there anything that happened that you'd like to talk about? And if the person says yes, and they describe a near-death experience, validate it. Yes, we've heard this before. Many people have this. Educate. For most people, this is a positive experience. It does change their life in a favorable manner. There are groups of people that have had these experiences that have group discussions. There's some books on the subject that I can recommend to you, but it's a definite clinical entity. And then the next part is extremely important, and that's to educate the family and friends, because essentially this is a new person, and their personality, their goals, their understanding of life, their religious beliefs, their morals are often profoundly changed, usually in a positive manner, but they're a different person. So the family also needs to be educated in how to interact. So that, David, is how I got into it, and it's had a very receptive audience. Again, I don't have any financial interest in the book, but I am the editor of Missouri Medicine Medical Journal. And after I was knee deep in reading about this, I thought, well, one way I can educate my peers is by having authorities write articles in the medical journal. And our journal is peer reviewed, which means we don't deal with speculation, we deal with real science. So I made a proposal to the contributing editors that we present this series of articles and that we present it as a syndrome that is very common, and doctors need to know how to respond. So they agreed. So the book is based on a series of peer-reviewed articles which appeared in our medical journal and were updated in 2017. And because this has never been done before, never been published in a peer-reviewed journal, and we were trying to emphasize the science of it, all of the leading experts worldwide responded in a favorable manner. So each chapter is by a leading researcher in near-death experiences. Yes.
It's very interesting, and it's something that folks are it's kind of a polarizing topic for some folks. They think this is just nothing but wishful thinking, or like you mentioned, hallucinations. Some people have talked about, DMT, this type of synthetic molecule replication of something that is emitted upon people's birth and death, and some kind of a hallucinogenic drug-like state that people are in when they're passing or in the process of passing, and then they're brought back because of some kind of medical intervention. Some folks say that it's, again, extraordinary brain activity, kind of like a final burst of energy or something that's taking place that's causing all of this hypersensitivity that creates a deep, imagination and expense and real, sense of hyper experience. And I'm sure you've got more precise terms for the big objections, but let's deal with that off the bat. I mean, why is this something that is beyond just an illusion or a understudied experience that the brain creates as a way of processing and coping with the trauma of dying?
Well, my approach to the subject will be perhaps different than many of your listeners. I'm a physician, and I'm interested in how physicians can help patients. And it is not helpful at all to tell a person that's had a near-death experience that they imagine it. If you read about this, either in our book or many of the books based on people who've had a near-death experience, it's the most real thing that's happened in their life. And they simply say it's ineffable. It's beyond words to be able to describe it. And something that's that profound, physicians need to be able to respond to it. So one part of me is very interested in the scientific aspects. And again, you mentioned the different chemicals that are released when a person starts the dying process. It's well recognized that the road to resuscitation is getting longer all the time, that people that would have surely died 50 years ago if they fell into a coma or in cardiac arrest, we can now resuscitate. But the road doesn't go to infinity, and at some point, even with the most modern science that will evolve, people die. The interesting aspect when I talk to my patients that have had near-death experiences is that they're interested in the message of the near-death experiences. And most near-death experiences are what we call positive. Let me outline for you, if I may, the steps of a prototypical near-death experience. And these were described by Dr. Raymond Moody. He presented 150 patients that describe this. So the person is usually in a situation where they truly are almost dead, and that can be trauma, bleeding, a severe accident, and they're in pain and anguish. And then they suddenly are at peace. They feel no pain. Often they hear pleasant music, and they have what's called autoscopy, which means their spirit or their soul or their mind lifts up above their body, and they look down at the venue below, and they see the automobile accident, or they see the doctors and nurses trying to resuscitate them. And they understand that the body line there is where they were, but they understand that body that people are working on is not them, that they're their consciousness. So at that point, the spirit leaves the physical realm and enters usually into what they describe as a tunnel of light. And they move towards a lighted place. And when they enter there, they recognize that it's a heavenly place. It's a rewarding place. And they're usually greeted by family and friends that have been deceased. And there's a wonderful, satisfying reunion. And then they meet with a supreme being. And the supreme being is often interpreted in terms of their religious experience. So Christians tend to see a biblical God. Many people do not see a figure that's anthropomorphized. They see a light that emits love and peace. And in the presence of the deity, they have a life review. So their whole life flashes before them. And they have sort of instantaneous experience about the good they've done, the bad they've done, how they could have done things better. And then they're given a choice by the deity. And the choice is, you can stay here for infinity, or you can go back. And obviously the people that that the deity is talking to have come back. And usually they come back because of loved ones, or they feel that it's just not their time. And then they very rapidly exit this heavenly place, and then they're in pain and anguish, and they wake up in a recovery room, or they're in an ambulance or something like that. So David, that's the classic near-death experience. Is there any aspects of it that was?
Well, there's a lot of things we could go. Is it always presented to them as a choice? I think I've heard some say they weren't really given a choice; they were just told by some guide or something, "You can't go here, go back," or something like that, right?
Well, there's all variations. They're kind of like vacations. There's good ones and bad ones, and long ones and short ones. But yeah. One that I just described is the typical one.
Yeah.
There are some people that never make it to the heavenly place. They go up the tunnel of light, and then they return. They do meet a variety of figures. Some people meet a deity or a way shepherd that says you have to go back. And then there's a whole antipode of this, and that's people that instead of going to a heavenly place, go to a hellish place. This is the minority of near-death experiences, but it can be profoundly disconcerting to the person and affect them adversely the rest of their life.
So when you hear these reported experiences, what are some of the evidence pieces that show that they couldn't have experienced what they experienced with sight and so forth when they're not supposed to be, clinically alive at that point? How do you demonstrate anecdotal evidence or circumstantial evidence that would seem to indicate that they really truly saw something that is defying what we consider to be typical sensory experience? I've heard of different stories. There's a classic story, I'm sure it's probably from Moody's book, where it talks about this person seeing a shoe at the top of a building that was exactly where they were found it later on when they were resuscitated, and there's no way they could have seen that random tennis shoe where it was on the top of the roof in the hospital building when they were in the state of clinical death. There's examples of, I guess maybe you could whittle down or give us, what do you think, maybe a story that comes to mind that's one of the strongest examples of reporting things that are basically impossible for them to have known?
Right. Well, in my real life, when I'm not editing, I'm an ophthalmologist, and I spent my career dealing with sight. And you're right. The great body of near-death experiences, in my opinion, will never be explained by sciences. The doctors that are looking at these recalled experiences of death are a very small subset. To me, a number of the most inexplicable events are blind people that see. So Dr. Kenneth Ring, in a publication in 1997 called Near Death and Out-of-Body Experiences in the Blind, a study of apparent eyeless vision, they report 31 blind individuals. So in their real life, they can't see. And true blindness, what we call no light perception, not just blurred vision. And these individuals had a near-death experience, and when they came back, they relayed exactly what went on in the operating room and details and colors that there's just no way, even if they were wide awake, even if they were giving some sort of stimulants, that they would be able to see. And I think that's just totally inexplicable. There are also people that are totally deaf that come back and report sounds. The instances that you described, there are individuals that come back and they describe not only what happened in the operating room, but what happened in the waiting room with their loved ones, or people in a different place, like at home, their children. So like the instance with the patient seeing the shoe on a ledge outside the hospital, there's no rational explanation for them, and no amount of science will ever explain that. I think that clearly shows that near-death experiences are truthfully way beyond science.
So how can you, let's just think about that. Is there any other material or atomistic explanation for how someone could perceive sight of something, like you said, in a waiting room? I've heard of stories. And again, and I want to ask a kind of a secondary question to that is, has anybody actually, and this is a form of science in the sense of like a detective, detective level science of saying, okay, I actually corroborated that they did see their loved one, independently verified that the loved one did get that Snickers bar in the snack machine in the waiting room while the clinical death occurred. I was able to corroborate that with a different level of evidence like you would present in the court of law. That's a kind of science, in my opinion. Is there any of that that's been meticulously documented, so it's not just a legend like, yeah, there was a story about this lady that said she saw her mother getting a thing outside. There's no way she could have seen that. So therefore, I mean, have they actually tightened up some of those reports circumstantially and and on the level that would be a pretty solid case if you were taking it to the court of law, that, you know, we had multiple witnesses report that yes, indeed, that action did occur while the patient was considered clinically dead. That's I mean, I guess I kind of muddled that question, but that's more of the
No,
heart I'm interested in right now.
yeah, no, I understand completely. And again, this first study that I mentioned, all 31 of those patients, every one of their experiences was validated. It's not like they came back and they said, you know, they saw a rainbow. They came back and they described what happened at the accident or the operating room or whatever. And yes, there's a very large body of case reports that have had the observations validated. Um, and again, there's a validation, but again, there's no explanation of, you know, how or why this should occurred. And you know, for instance, if you got on an operating room table and we taped your eyes shut and then we draped your head, and then you laid there and something went on around you, and then we uncovered you and we said, David, what happened while you were covered up? Unless you'd heard something, you'd have no clue. But these people in a similar situation, that's the way a person's prepared for surgery. They come back and they describe in detail, you know, like a nurse with red hair, and the doctor was wearing a face mask that had sunrises on it, and it's verified by the people there. And there's a textbook from a European author. His name escapes me now, but the entire book is filled with nothing but near-death experiences that have been validated by a third party.
So do you have a different working, maybe an ad hoc, or I don't know, working definition of what produces sight in your patients now that you've seen this evidence that demonstrates that sight is possible outside of your eyes being able to see things?
No. I mean, if you have a blind person, no light perception, but the rest of their brain is intact, you can stimulate the back of the brain. That's kind of the neural processor, like the computer for sight, and you can have images that come up. But no matter what you do, you can't get the brain to perceive what the eye would see. It's not real time. It's like a stored memory sort of thing. So that's why it's so impressive to me, because I have no explanation whatsoever, no scientific evidence that this could happen within the frame of science. So I do believe, as a scientist, but also as a person that eventually will die and is looking for answers of what happens next, I think there's messages and there's things to be learned in what these people tell us when they come back.
Do you see, have you looked at Eastern philosophy? There's some Eastern philosophical thoughts that suggest that all matter has consciousness. Even rocks have a lower form of consciousness relative to their you know, their essence or their structures, and therefore you know, reports of near-death experiences are indications that the body has a conscious perception beyond just the different sensory organs like eyes and ears. You know, that it's a whole body sensorial experience that is beyond just you know, the particular organs that we typically associate with those senses.
You know, David, I have to say that philosophical view is way above my pay grade. So I don't like to talk on things I don't understand.
Sure.
But I don't.
Right. When I've also heard, and I think your book chronicles examples of patients who report, you know, encountering folks who had died that they didn't even know about, and then they resuscitate and they found out that they had died and they didn't even know those people prior to their death experience. Did you chronicle any of those cases?
Yes. In our book, there's 2 chapters written by Dr. Eben Alexander. Dr. Alexander is a Harvard neurosurgeon and is probably the largest physician, proponent, advocate of near-death experiences. And he basically fell ill with a almost always fatal E. coli meningoencephalitis. I mean, the recovery is just absolutely zero. And he made a miraculous and totally medically unexplainable recovery. And during that process, he met an individual that shepherded him and revealed to Dr. Alexander that she was his sister, and he had no siblings. So when he came back, he spoke with his parents, and they revealed for the first time that they did have a daughter, that she died, and that they decided not to tell him because they thought it would upset him. So that's probably the most documented case of learning something that they didn't know before the near-death experience. There's one other, if I may. This is a physician that did not write in a chapter in our book because she was basically overcommitted. But that's Dr. Mary Neal. And Dr. Neal is a widely respected orthopedic surgeon in Jackson, Wyoming. And she experienced a near-death experience when she was kayaking in South America, and she was pulled into a whirlpool and should have died, should have drowned. And she had a near-death experience, and she made a miraculous recovery also, and she's written about it. But something that she shared in her book was just unbelievable. She had a son, and she said from the time the son was about 7 or 8 years old, he kept telling Dr. Neal that he was going to die when he was 18. And she, of course, would tell him, don't say that, it's terrible. That's not, not going to happen. And he just repeated it. And his 18th birthday came and went, and she thought, oh, thank God this is over. It's not going to happen. He'll stop talking about it. And within 2 or 3 weeks of his 16th birthday, he was hit by an automobile while he was skateboarding around Jackson and killed. So, I mean, how do you explain that? There's got to be something more than science and neurotransmitters that's involved in this. There has to be a message, maybe not in all, but in some of these.
And what was the connection between her near-death experience and his knowledge? He only said that after the near-death experience, or
no? He'd said it before. She had never told anyone, so she shared her near-death experience, and she believes very much in the spirituality. That she met God that was in when she started that story. Then she shared as an auxiliary story about her son.
Wow. And you've also mentioned examples of people saying that they're non-believers or agnostic or atheistic, and they encounter spiritual figures like Jesus, right? Have you documented those examples?
Yes, and again, the deity is often perceived in the context of the patient's cultural and religious beliefs. So Christians often see a anthropomorphized human with a beard and so forth. Hispanics often see the Blessed Virgin. Jewish people don't tend to see the Christian God or the Mother of God. Other religions just perceive their deity as light, love, radiation, peace, that sort of thing. But these people come back with a profound belief of a supreme being and something happening after death that follows their religious beliefs. One thing, David, we haven't talked about, it's very satisfying to me as a Christian, as a person that's going to be dying, to perceive heaven as many people relate. but as many as 5 to 10% of near-death experiences are what are called dark or troubling or distressing. And those people go to perdition. They go to a hellish place that is devilish. It is everything that a person can imagine that constitutes the entity of hell, hellish, and perdition. And when they come back, these people are profoundly affected, much more so than people that have a heavenly near-death experience. And they usually take one of three routes. Either they become extremely religious, trying to change, turn their life around, or they spend a lot of time and a lot of money on a psychiatrist's couch and taking psychoactive medications, or they try to convince themselves that, hey, this just didn't happen. And the last thing that I would add about this is that in the Judeo-Christian tradition, a just man or woman, a person that leads a good life, when they die, they go to a heavenly place, and vice versa for people that live a terrible life. But there often is a deconstruct in this, in that some people that have led extraordinarily good lives go to a hellish place, and vice versa. Someone that's a real fiend and led an evil life goes to a heavenly place. And there's no explanation for that, and it kind of offends my Christian Judeo sense of what's right.
Right. Yeah. Do they, the fact that they're back may indicate that that was a warning or something, maybe? I mean, who knows? I mean,
Yeah.
So it's not all doom and gloom or despairing there if they're back, right? That maybe that was a warning to get them to
Right.
go
Second
further.
chance. Yeah.
Right.
Second chance.
Do many of them interpret that way, or do a lot of them just say, oh my goodness, there is nothing but evil experiences headed my way, no matter what I believe or how good I live for my faith?
Mm-hmm. A lot less is known about distressing near-death experiences, because if you die, David, and you go to a heavenly place, and I die and I go to a hellish place, and we both come back, what does that say about us? And you would be more likely to share your experience than I would.
Mm-hmm.
So the people that have researched this, the chapter in our book on distressing near-death experiences, feel that the true incidence is much higher than the 2% that they quote. And yes, when people that have these come back, they usually get they're going to turn their life around and do the right thing. So it could be a warning.
Yeah. And you mentioned again. I wanted to, because I think it was it may have been Bruce Grayson's book on this, or it might be yours too. But there was some examples I saw chronicled where someone again didn't have a view about God or anything. They were rather atheistic, and they saw a spiritual figure like Jesus, and it bothered them because they were like, I don't agree with his existence or the religious claims about him, but nevertheless they saw him, and it kind of put them in a cognitive dissonance. Have you seen any of those cases?
I personally have not.
Okay.
The few that have described it's sort of a come to Jesus moment, turn your life around.
Right.
So they have reacted to the message.
Right. Um, and again, you've chronicled, I think, cases of children having near-death experiences too, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Near-death experiences occur in children. They usually are not going to self-report. They have to be asked about it. But from a medical standpoint, it's extraordinarily important to have the child's experience validated and supported. And there are a number of authors that have written extensively on this, but it's even more important in a child, because if a child or a young person has a near-death experience and their parents, their family, their friends, their community embrace it, reinforce it, the researchers have found that these children develop extraordinarily fast, and some of them are almost polymaths. They have can do a multiplication in their head. They have photographic memories. They really are stellar. But the converse is unfortunately true. If the child is told, as many adults are, this didn't happen, don't tell anybody, people think you're crazy, they fall behind their peers, their development is not as good. So it's people that deal with children that almost die, or adults that have a child tell them about an experience that resembles a near-death experience. It's very important to validate it. And it's very interesting that I've been invited to many, many, many hospitals to deliver talks to physicians and nurses. I was not asked to go to a pediatric children's hospital in this area. So I sent a letter asking if I could speak to the faculty, and it's the only institution that has told me, no, we're not interested in what you have to say. And then that actually, pediatricians and doctors that deal with youth are the most important. So I haven't gotten the message to that particular hospital.
Huh. Have you seen any case reports of near-death experiences that describe other entities, traditional religions, Eastern religions? I'm thinking of some of the gods of Hinduism and Krishna and different gods like that, or older gods like pagan Norwegian gods and things of that nature, Scandinavian, Odin and Thor. Do they perceive those types of entities in any of the reports that you have examined?
Yes, they do. And there is a registry, worldwide registry of near-death experiences that Dr. Long, a researcher, maintains, and he has, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000. But the case reports come from all around the world. And yes, in those traditions that have different deities, different gods, different beliefs, they see their gods. People that are people that believe in spirits and nature often see that. But that's the long answer. The short answer is yes, that the deity does take different forms.
Do these reports all seem to indicate that the experiencer's worldview or religious view is what they see when they have their experience of death? Is it always like that?
I'm not sure I understand the question, David.
Do all of the near-death experiences, do they always correlate to what people expect to see in the afterlife?
No, not at all. Sometimes it's just spot on. For instance, I have a neighbor, lives 4 houses away, and we have a get-together every summer, and the sponsor told him about my book, and he asked to speak with me, and we came into our house, and like myself, he has a very traditional Catholic upbringing, and he described heaven, and his words were, Dr. Hagan, it was the Catholic heaven, I know. But yes, it is perceived differently by different individuals, but it's always pleasurable beyond description, and something that they would like eternity to be.
You mentioned that a lot of folks have tremendously different personalities after having their experience. What are some of the common characteristics you've noted there again? You said it's like they're a different person.
Yeah, well, some people that had no thought of what's going to happen after they die, and were hedonists and, wasting their life with drugs and so forth, have turned themselves around and said, yes, there is a reason to live a good life. there are people that have changed careers. I mean, there are people that are like in sales and they've had something like this, and it's been so profound that they've gone into a religious clergyman, or something where they can help people, devoting their life to charity or physician or something like that. So it is profoundly life changing. And even people that stay in the same groove, same profession, they have a wholly different view of life and what it's about and where it's going and how they react to people.
And they always report that these experiences, most of the time they're reporting that these experiences are more real than their normal life was before and after, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Universal is, it's beyond words, or ineffable. I can't begin to tell you. It's just something you would have to experience. So, yeah.
Have you had any case reports that you've examined where people report seeing what they believe to be extraterrestrials or aliens? I mean, that's a common belief in some parts of of the world, where people believe aliens seeded us in life, and maybe when they believe that, they see something like that if they have a near-death experience. Have you seen any case studies like that?
Well, personally, I've had no one repeat that to me. And I have a lot of people tell me about their near-death experience, but also in my reading, no, I have never read any report of extraterrestrials or you know, objects that are floating in heaven or in space. Nothing like that at all.
Have anybody who's experienced near-death experience come out of it and say, I have a sixth sense, or I see spirits, or I have telepathy, or I can know when someone's died across the country without, I just have a feeling? Do they report anything that would be considered supernatural or paranormal or something beyond what people normally expect people to do?
Yes. First of all, we mentioned children that come back that are favorably respond to, that have qualities of, super intellect. I mean, just the smartest of the smart. There are also people that come back that are, most people that come back are much more intuitive in terms of understanding what's going on with people they interact with. There is a subset of people that come back that commercialize their experience. They write books, they go on lectures, and within that subset, there are people that, for cash, serve as mediums to connecting people with the deceased loved ones, fortune telling, that type of thing. Because they're remunerated and it's an important part of how they make their living, some of these, you have to take with a grain of salt.
Right. When you study these cases, is there anything that you want to see? I mean, you sent me a paper that we can get into a little bit here, but is there anything that you want to see in the future, or of how to conduct more precise measurements and verifications or explanations as to how people can experience things? Because again, to me, just going back to the sight issue alone, instead of going on through all the other variables, just sticking with that and isolating that and saying, okay, how can we as scientists and doctors better understand the evidence of people seeing things, like you said, in the room when they're unconscious, that they're not capable because their eyes are not looking. But I think more extraordinarily, just seeing things that are in other rooms. I mean, that's physically impossible. And yet we are told that the eye is how we perceive sight. So is there any way to take that as a variable, for an example, and to do further precise experiments or measurements or techniques to further drill down into measuring these things objectively and digging down into possible explanations as to how one could perceive a visual perception of something while not having access to eyes in that room?
With regard to vision, I don't see how, maybe it's a good pun, I don't see, but the nerves, the central nervous system and the back of the eye, the retina, is part of the brain. It's kind of the brain's window, so to speak. And brain tissue, when it's killed or it dies, it doesn't try and regenerate. On the other hand, peripheral nerves do. So if someone has their hand cut off, they'll try and put it back together again and sew the nerves together because they'll try and knit. But if someone has their spine cut, they don't try and sew it back together. So the eye has very little to no regenerative possibilities. So I don't see research in that regard being fulfilling. Now, again, the link that I sent you, there was a large symposium of researchers, and that report, if you look at it, it's like 20 pages long, and it has all kinds of criteria. They are trying to study the neurophysiology of dying. But these other things, I don't see how they can be studied, particularly those that are just absolutely verified by unimpeachable sources. So that's why at this state, I believe that there is something beyond science here. I don't think that science will ever be able to explain most of the features of a classic near-death experience.
And in the paper, just for reference for folks who want to look it up, it's Guidelines and Standards for the Study of Death and Recalled Experiences of Death, Multidisciplinary Consensus Statement and Proposed Future Directions. This is in the, which journal is this?
I think it's, I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's the Sciences,
the
Scientific Academy of New York.
Yeah, the New York Academy of Sciences is this here. So when you encounter the skeptical materialist kind of establishment view on this, what is their, because they can muddy the waters. I mean, not intentionally so, but they can say, it's this or that, it's this chemical. But what is the best, scientism or materialist explanation for how one can see people or things that are independently corroborated to be true in another room while they're unconscious and dead clinically in another room? What is the best explanation for what's going on there from a materialistic, scientific, more establishment view that you've encountered? What's there, or maybe you could make it up, to steel man to strengthen their case? What's their best argument as to what is creating the perception of sight of some action in another room or place?
Well, oftentimes their mind is just set. They're not going to go look at the literature, so to speak, the books that have been published. And they may be agnostics, or they may be atheists, or they may not have any sort of interest in it at all. But even if it's not, even like a hallucination, even if it's not real, doctors need to know how to deal with patients that have hallucinations. So anybody in the healthcare field, anyone that has a loved one that's had a near-death experience, they need to know about it. And then I think the more that you're kind of drawn into it, as I have, the more you realize that there's science here, but there's something beyond science. I've published about 350 scientific papers in peer-reviewed journals, and if I publish like this book, I don't think the message is really there. I mean, someone that wants to learn more about this and finds that there's no way physically that some of these visions could have been done by any altered method, it has to be something beyond the physical world.
What have if any views that you've changed since investigating this topic? Maybe you held a certain views or dispositions towards things prior to investigating this topic and publishing this book and other papers, and then after that, how do you have anything different that you've changed your mind about?
Well, yes. I mean, I personally believe in life after death. And to hear these people wax and rapturous about what heaven is like, I mean, I just think that's beyond words, and what I hope happens after death. And truthfully, I hope it happens to everyone. I mean, these people that come back that have had these hellish experiences and they describe how horrendous it is and the direct antithesis of a positive experience, that's something I would not wish on anyone. I mean, even Hitler, Mao Zedong, Stalin, no matter how you lived a life, I don't think there's anything that I would wish in eternity to be in pain. I hope they get a do-over. But personally, I always tried to live a good life, and I believe in a life after death. And I hope that when I die, that I see the tunnel and enter a heavenly place and meet my parents and meet my God.
Have you encountered in those negative experiences? I've seen other papers. I don't know if you've seen this as well in your research of the different cases you've chronicled. Some experiencing different types of negative, like some it's a classical hell-like experience with, a dark cave and smells and demonic-looking entities and terrible-looking humanoid-looking people, anguishing and pain and suffering and pain inflicted on them. Others have described just inky blackness and being completely isolated from any presence of love for what feels like eternity, like they're a star in the middle of the space and there's nothing around them but just emptiness and loneliness and separation from any kind of, good thing or decency or feeling of love or companionship. Have you separated the different negative experiences into different categories that kind of fall into a certain pattern?
The morphology of hellish experience is not in an area that I'm interested. However, there is, and I don't remember the name of the author, but there's a whole book on that. It's like 60 Seconds in Hell, that I'm paraphrasing the title, but it's written by an individual that went to a hellish place and he filled up a whole book with what it's like. And I think if you or any of your listeners are interested, that would be the place to go.
And what is that again?
It's something like 60 Seconds in Hell.
Okay.
And actually, he spent the author spends at least a few years ago. He went around to different churches and religious groups talking about that. And the way I became aware of it is one of my patients came in and knew I was interested in near-death experiences. And she said that the author gave a few of them a copy of his book, and she had two, and she'd like me to have the other one. And I'm saying this humorously, but my reply to her is 60 Seconds in Hell. I have 14 years of Catholic education. I know what hell is.
Yeah. I know this is kind of maybe a weird question to ask, or maybe it's unethical to do this, but has there been any attempt to do intentional clinical experiments with people who are near death, for example? And again, this probably violates all the concepts of modern bioethics or whatever, but if someone has a patient that they know is in a state of, declining in health, and has there been ever an attempt to say, okay, can we say, hey, look, we're going to put an object in the clinic or the hospital somewhere, and if you have a near-death experience, we're going to do everything we can to resuscitate you because our intention is to keep you alive and get you healed. But can you find that object for us and report back where it was? Has there ever been any attempt to try to do like experimentation with this to see if they can, demonstrate some kind of clinical observations of people's ability to kind of lucidly pinpoint things or observe things that would build data towards something outside of traditional sensory experience?
Well, again, nothing that's unethical, but you said you spoke with Dr. Grayson. There is a university that has an academic department in paranormal research, and they try and do it in a scientific manner. And Dr. Grayson was, he's retired now, but he was head of that, and he's written his own books and has a very big interest in it. But one thing they did do, and it's interesting to bring that up, is at the university hospital in the operating rooms, above the line of sight, they put a number of different random objects. And these objects were not visible to anyone, any place in the operating room. And then when someone had a near-death experience, or someone was resuscitated and came back to life, they interviewed them and to see if they'd had a near-death experience. And at least when I put my slides together, probably 4 years ago, they had not had anyone that came back, even those that reported near-death experience, that described seeing those objects near the ceiling in their operating rooms.
So they did not see the objects.
Did not report seeing it. That's correct.
So what would that indicate? Would that indicate evidence against any kind of near death, some kind of
No, not at all. It doesn't rule anything out, but it certainly could rule in validating near-death experiences if this person reports as they went to the ceiling before they left the realm of earth into the heavenly place. If they objectively reported saying seeing a doll or a bowling ball or whatever it was, that is one way that the Department of Parapsychology could validate that there's something in here beyond science.
Right. Very interesting. Well, Dr. Hagan, it's been a real pleasure to speak with you. And I want folks, again, to check out your book, The Science of Near-Death Experiences. I'm looking at some of the descriptions. Dr. Raymond Moody, MD, PhD, says about your book, it's a landmark study of seemingly transcendent consciousness reported by patients who were revived after dying. Research into such experiences began with Greek philosophers, including Plato and Democritus, but Dr. Hagan's book will be the gold standard on this subject for years to come. The book brings together historical, philosophical, psychological, clinical, and neuroscientific aspects of near-death experiences to illuminate one of the deepest mysteries of human experience. I thought it's a very good description of the book, and I enjoyed it myself. Any last thoughts you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, David, first of all, thanks for having me. And I think this profoundly is something that people can and should look into, maybe not through the lens of near-death experience, but what happens when we die? That's the great eternal question. And I do think that learning more about near-death experiences can enhance and enrich the way that we lead our lives. And certainly if there's a metric for getting into heaven, it's a metric that we want to follow.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Hagan, for your time.
Okay, David. Bye now. Bye, guys.